From Li Shiyuan's heartfelt apology to his wife, to Earl Beringer being thankful for experiencing the love of a good woman, to Georges Pitard's sorrowful letter to his wife before his execution, these 8 men were not just death row criminals saying goodbye, they were husbands and human beings expressing their love in their final breaths. Sir Walter Raleigh. Our journey begins in the cold stone chambers of Winchester Prison in December 1603, where one of history's most romantic and tragic farewell letters was penned by a man facing the executioner's axe. Sir Walter Raleigh, the celebrated Elizabethan explorer, courtier and poet, sat in his cell, fully expecting to meet his end after being convicted of treason against King James. Thus, the irony of his situation was not lost on him. This man, who had once been a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, had fallen dramatically from grace under the new monarch, leading to his 1603 treason conviction in what was known as the main plot. As he awaited what he believed would be his imminent execution, Raleigh's thoughts turned not to his achievements as an explorer or his political machinations, but to the woman who had shared his turbulent life, his beloved wife, Elizabeth Bess Throckmorton. Their love story itself was one of scandal and devotion. Their secret marriage in 1591 had enraged Queen Elizabeth, leading to brief imprisonments for both, yet their bond had only grown stronger through adversity. Now, facing what he believed were his final hours, Raleigh took quill to parchment and poured his heart onto paper in what would become one of the most moving farewell letters in English history. "You shall now receive, my dear wife, my last words in these my last lines. My love I send you, that you may keep it when I am dead, and my counsel that you may remember it when I am no more," he began, his words carrying the weight of a lifetime's devotion compressed into what he believed were his final expressions of love. The letter, painstakingly smuggled out of his cell, revealed a man transformed by impending death from courtier to devoted husband. He thanked Bess for her many travails and care taken for me, which, though they have not taken effect as you wished, yet my debt to you is not the less, but pay it I never shall in this world. These words spoke to the countless hours she had spent advocating for his life, the political connections she had tried to leverage, the sleepless nights she had endured, but perhaps most touching was his practical concern for her future. "I beseech you for the love you bear me living, do not hide yourself many days, but by your travails seek to help your miserable fortunes and the right of your poor child. Thy mourning cannot avail me, I am but dust," he wrote, showing a remarkable consideration for her well-being even as he faced his own mortality. The letter concluded with words that have echoed through the centuries: "The everlasting God, powerful, infinite, and omnipotent God, that almighty God, who is goodness itself, the true life and true light, keep thee and thine. Have mercy on me, and teach me to forgive my persecutors and false accusers, and send us to meet in his glorious kingdom. My dear wife, farewell. Bless my poor boy. Pray for me, and let my good God hold you both in his arms." Remarkably, Raleigh's execution was stayed, and he was reprieved to life imprisonment in the Tower of London, but fate would eventually catch up with him. In 1618, after a failed expedition to Guyana, he finally faced the executioner's block on October 29th. This time, there was no dramatic written farewell. Instead, Bess was permitted to visit him for several hours on the night before his execution, from around midnight until about 4 a.m., where they shared an emotional in-person parting. From the romantic poetry of Elizabethan England, we travel to the stark reality of modern China, where in the bitter cold of December 2017, a very different but equally heart-wrenching goodbye unfolded. Li Shiyuan. Li Shiyuan, a 30-year-old former driver from Daqing in China's Heilongjiang province, was about to face execution for a murder conviction that had torn apart multiple families. The crime that brought Li to this moment was as tragic as it was senseless. In May 2015, after an argument at a karaoke bar, Li had chased a vehicle carrying 5 people in his own car, causing it to crash into a ditch and burst into flames. 3 occupants died in the fire, while 2 others were injured. The weight of those lost lives had followed him through his trial, conviction, and the long walk to death row. But on this freezing December morning, as Li prepared to pay the ultimate price for his actions, his thoughts were not on his crimes or his fate. They were on the 3 people who meant everything to him: his wife, his elderly mother, and his toddler daughter, estimated to be just 2 to 3 years old. The meeting occurred at the prison in Daqing, and what happened next was captured on video, creating one of the most emotionally devastating pieces of footage to ever emerge from China's criminal justice system. The scene began behind bars, quarters, where Li could initially only speak to his family through the cold metal barrier. He appeared shackled and distraught, repeatedly begging guards with the desperate plea, "Let me hold my daughter," as he reached out emotionally toward his child. Then, in a moment of unexpected humanity within the rigid confines of the Chinese penal system, authorities allowed the family to move outside near a prison van. Li hugged his sobbing wife tightly, sharing a tearful embrace that reflected their shared grief and final intimacy. In that moment, suspended between life and death, they were simply a husband and wife saying goodbye. The weight of his actions, the judgment of society, the machinery of justice, all of it faded into the background as they held each other in the snow. But perhaps the most culturally significant moment came when Li turned to his mother. In a gesture deeply rooted in Chinese traditions of filial piety, he knelt on the cold ground and performed a traditional kowtow, bowing his head to the ground 3 times as a profound gesture of respect and apology. But the most heart-wrenching part of this entire scene involved his daughter. Li was finally allowed to hug her, holding her close as he broke down in tears. The child, too young to comprehend the gravity of the situation, remained innocent and cheerful, smiling, waving her hand, and calling out, "Bye-bye, Dad," as Li was led away in shackles toward the van. Li himself was visibly emotional throughout, crying and appearing resigned, yet heartbroken. After the brief encounter, lasting only a few minutes, Li was escorted into the van by police officers and driven to the execution site, carrying with him the final sounds of his daughter's innocent voice saying goodbye to a father she would never see again. As we move from the snow-covered prison yards of China to the sterile execution chambers of Texas, we encounter Earl Russell Beringer, a man whose final words would become a testament to the redemptive power of love, even in the darkest circumstances. Earl Beringer. Earl Beringer, 33 years old, was executed by lethal injection on June 11, 1997 for the 1986 murders of Janet Hancock and her fiancé, Daniel Brennan Meyer. The crime that brought Earl to death row was brutal and senseless. He and an accomplice had shot the couple repeatedly while they were parked on a lover's lane in Tarrant County. Throughout his appeals, Earl maintained his innocence, claiming his co-defendant committed the killings, but his claims were rejected by courts. But what made Earl's story remarkable wasn't just the crime or even the punishment, it was the woman who stood by him. He was married to Lori Lynn Anderson Beringer, whom he referred to as a good woman, though little is publicly documented about their relationship beyond his own references to her. Texas Department of Criminal Justice protocols typically allow death row inmates up to 8 hours of visitation with approved family members and friends on the day of execution, though the specific conversations are not recorded or released unless witnesses share them afterward. Earl spent much of his final day reading the Bible and visiting with relatives, which would have included his wife based on standard procedures and his later mention of her and other inmates. His final statement, delivered from the execution chamber with a Bible on his chest and in the presence of witnesses, included an emotional reference to his wife as part of a broader reflection on his life and family. "It's a good day to die. I walked in here like a man, and I am leaving here like a man. I had a good life. I have known the love of a good woman, my wife. I have a good family. My grandmother is the pillar of the community. I love and cherish my friends and family. Thank you for your love," Earl declared, his words carrying the weight of a man who had found something precious even in the midst of his downfall. In a moment that showed remarkable empathy even as he faced his own death, Earl also addressed the victims' families. "To the Hancock family, I am sorry for the pain I caused you. If my death gives you any peace, so be it." These words revealed a man who, whatever his crimes, had found within himself the capacity for remorse and consideration for others' suffering. His statement continued with spiritual reflection. "I want my friends to know it is not the way to die, but I belong to Jesus Christ. I confess my sins." The statement appears to trail off or be incomplete in official records, possibly due to the effects of the lethal injection beginning. Continuing our journey through the final moments of condemned men, we encounter Uyongu Yata Uyungana, whose complex personal life and tragic final goodbye illuminate the complicated relationships that can develop even in the shadow of death row. Uyongu Yata Uyungana. Uyongu Yata Uyungana, also known by his Chinese name Cao Yisheng, was a Taiwanese indigenous leader from the Tzu people, born on July 5, 1908. He was a musician, educator, and political activist who advocated for indigenous rights and autonomy during a tumultuous period in Taiwan's history. Educated at Tainan Normal School, he became a teacher and briefly served as mayor of Wufeng Township, later renamed Alishan, in Chiayi in 1945. His activism intensified during the 228 incident of 1945, 1947, a widespread anti-government uprising against the Kuomintang (KMT) regime, where he led Sioux fighters in an attempt to seize Chiayi Airport, though the effort failed. In 1952, amid Taiwan's White Terror era, 1949-1987, a period of martial law and severe political repression under the KMT, Yata Uyungana was re-arrested. He was accused of treason and banditry for his continued advocacy of indigenous self-governance and alleged ties to communist influences, though these charges were largely fabricated as part of the government's crackdown on dissent. On April 17, 1954, at age 45, he was executed by firing squad in Taipei, alongside 5 other indigenous leaders. This group execution was part of a broader suppression of indigenous movements, with estimates of white terror victims ranging from 10,000 to 30,000 executed or imprisoned. But Yata Uyungana's story doesn't end with his execution. In a remarkable twist of fate, his final words to his beloved wife Chun Fang would remain hidden for nearly 60 years, creating one of the most delayed love letters in human history. Like many white terror prisoners, Yata Uyungana was permitted to write brief final letters to family members shortly before execution. These letters were intended as farewells, but they were not immediately delivered. Instead, they were archived by the authorities and only rediscovered decades later. In 2008, during research by the granddaughter of another executed prisoner, 177 such letters were found in Taiwan's National Archives. After advocacy by groups like the Taiwan Association for Truth and Reconciliation, the letters were finally released to families in 2011, nearly 60 years after the executions. Yata Uyungana's letter to his wife was one of these poignant documents, and its contents reveal a man whose love for his family was intertwined with his deep connection to his indigenous homeland. Chun Fang, whom I long for, how glad I am to know you are healthy and well. No amount of gold, silver, or gems are more precious than our darling children. Do you remember the song? As long as we have our homes and our land, we will be fine, because there are so many amazing children. No matter if our possessions are confiscated, my innocence will be revealed. In the fields and in the mountains, my spirit will always be. Don't give up the land. But for his wife Chun Fang, this vindication came far too late. She had lived and died without ever receiving her husband's final words of love. From the political oppression of 1950s Taiwan, we journeyed to Nazi-occupied France, where another kind of political persecution was claiming lives and tearing apart families. Georges Pitard. Georges-Émile Pitard was born in 1897 in France and became a prominent lawyer at the Paris bar. He specialized in defending syndicalists, communists, and those unjustly imprisoned during the early stages of the Nazi occupation of France, which began in 1940. As a militant communist and active resistant, Pitard was targeted under the German hostage policy, Otagespolitik, implemented in autumn 1941 by order of Adolf Hitler. This policy allowed for the arbitrary execution of civilians, often political prisoners, in retaliation for acts of resistance against German forces. Pitard was arrested on June 25, 1941, alongside other communist lawyers, including Antoine Hadje, Michel Rolnikas, and Maurice Boitel, during a wave of anti-communist roundups following the German invasion of the Soviet Union. He was interned at the Compiègne Royalieu camp, a transit point for political prisoners. On September 16, 1941, an attack on a German soldier in Paris prompted the selection of 12 hostages for execution, including Pitard. Their names were plastered on yellow posters across Paris by order of General Otto von Stülpnagel, the Nazi military commander. Pitard was executed by firing squad at Mont Valérien, a fortress near Paris used for over 1,000 such killings during the occupation, on September 20, 1941. He was 44 years old. But it was on the night before his execution that Georges Pitard penned what would become one of the most tender farewell letters in the history of wartime resistance. Under Nazi policy, condemned hostages were often informed of their fate only shortly before execution and permitted to write brief final letters, which were censored and delivered post-mortem. Pitard wrote his letter to his wife Lienne on September 19, 1941, the eve of his execution, from his cell. The letter, preserved in historical collections, reflects a mix of grief, love, regret, and stoic acceptance, emphasizing their shared memories and urging her to be strong. "It is necessary for you to be extremely courageous, because this time misfortune is upon us. It flashed like lightning, and it strikes us," he began, showing remarkable consideration for her emotional state even as he faced his own death. The letter revealed a man confronting his own imperfections in their relationship. "We quarreled a few times, hurt each other for trifles," he acknowledged, showing the kind of honest self-reflection that often comes only when facing mortality. But then his words turned to the memories that truly mattered. "This evening, I think of your sweetness, your kindness, of our sweet moments, those from long ago and those of yesterday. Know well, my darling, one could not love you more than I did," he wrote, his love transcending the cold cold stone walls of his cell, and the certainty of his approaching death. The letter's closing was perhaps the most touching of all. "And I will fall asleep with your sweet image in my eyes, and the taste of our last kisses that are not that distant, my sweet friend, my gentle little Lien. Be sensible, be reasonable, love me for a long time yet," he concluded, asking her to carry their love forward even after he was gone. But it was his postscript that revealed the depth of his tenderness. "I kiss, passionately, your photograph and press it to my heart. The first photo of our youth, and the one from Luchon in which you are wearing flowers," he wrote, showing that even in his final hours, he carried with him the visual reminders of their happiest moments together. Pitard also expressed pride in his life and ideals in a separate letter to his mother. "I leave, proud of my life, proud of my ideal," but it was his words to Lien that revealed the man behind the political martyr, a husband who loved deeply and completely, even unto death. Our next story brings us back to the clinical environment of a Texas execution chamber, but with a twist that speaks to the unexpected connections that can form even in the most unlikely circumstances. Billy Galloway. Billy John Galloway, a 41-year-old death row inmate from South Dakota, was executed by lethal injection on May 13, 2010, at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville for the 1998 capital murder of U.S. Army recruiter David Logie. Galloway's path to death row began with a cross-country crime spree involving his then-girlfriend Deanne Bayless, accomplice Kevin Varga, executed the day prior, and Varga's girlfriend Venus Anderson. The group, all on parole or probation, was en route to Mexico when they lured Logie under the pretense of a drug deal, beat him to death with fists, a hammer, and a tree limb, and stole his wallet and credit cards. His primary romantic relationship documented in case records was with Deanne Bayless, described consistently as his girlfriend, not wife, who testified against him and received a 40-year sentence for murder. But it was Galloway's relationship with Adonia Buzinis that would define his final moments. Described in multiple reports as a close friend, possibly developed through pen-pal correspondence while on death row, a common practice for inmates, she was present as a witness during the execution, alongside his father, stepmother, and spiritual advisor. In his official last statement, delivered in the execution chamber moments before the lethal injection began at 6:12 p.m. CDT, he was pronounced dead at 6:19 p.m. Galloway expressed remorse and directly addressed Adonia. "If I can go back and change the past, I would. There's nothing I can do. I'm sorry. I love you, Adonia. That's it." Moving on is the dreadful story of Jeff Emery, who had to say goodbye to a woman who became a huge part of his life in his final days. Jeff Emery. Jeff Emery, full name Jeffrey John Emery, was a death row inmate in Texas, executed by lethal injection on December 8, 1998, at the age of 39. He had been convicted of the 1979 capital murder of 20-year-old Texas A&M University student LaShawn Mullinghouse, whom he sexually assaulted and stabbed 20 times during a burglary at her College Station apartment. Emery, who had a prior criminal history, including burglaries, assaults, and an attempted rape in Minnesota, was sentenced to death in 1986 after his initial 1980 conviction was overturned on appeal due to procedural issues. During his long years on death row, Emery formed a relationship that would define his final moments. His last words were addressed directly to Katharina Meijenberg, described in contemporary news accounts as a close female friend from the Netherlands who had corresponded with him during his incarceration and was present as a personal witness. Witnesses observed Emery pressing his hand against the glass window, separating him from the viewing room as he spoke. This physical gesture, reaching out towards someone who had become important to him, added a layer of poignancy to his final words. His complete last statement was, "I just want to tell Katharina I love you and you know how I feel about you. Take care of yourself. That's all I have to say." These words served as his public goodbye, expressing affection and concern for someone who had brought light into the darkness of his final years. Meijenberg was the only individual named in the statement. No wife or other family members were mentioned. 5 witnesses were present on Emery's behalf, including Meijenberg, while the victim's side had 4 witnesses, including Mullinghouse's mother and brother. Emery was pronounced dead at 6:24 p.m. CST, 6 minutes after the lethal injection began. Our final story brings us to the very recent execution of Steven Nelson, whose goodbye to his young wife and their service dog represents perhaps the most emotionally complex farewell in our entire collection. Steven Nelson. Stephen LaWayne Nelson was executed on February 5, 2025, becoming the first execution in Texas and the second in the U.S. that year for the 2011 capital murder of Pastor Clint Dobson during a robbery at North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. Nelson's case drew particular attention due to his recent marriage to Helene Noah Dubois, also reported as Helena Noah Dubois or Noah Dubois, in December 2024, just weeks before his execution. The 29-year-old French immigrant had met Nelson through a prison letter-writing program Instagram about 5 years before his execution, seeking someone who could relate to her personal struggles from experience. On March 3, 2011, Nelson and co-defendants Anthony Gregory Springs and Clifford Jefferson had entered North Point Baptist Church, intending to rob it. They bound and suffocated Pastor Clint Dobson with a plastic bag, causing additional blunt force trauma, and severely beat Church Secretary Judy Elliott, who survived with massive head trauma. Evidence against Nelson included DNA from bloodstains on his shoes, matching the victims and fingerprints at the scene. Nelson's goodbye to his wife occurred during this phase on February 5, 2025, at approximately 6:26 p.m. CST, with Dubois present as a witness alongside his spiritual advisor and anti-death penalty activists. His official, last statement, recorded by TDCJ, was directed largely at Dubois. "I will always love you no matter. That our love is uncontrollable. There is no definition and no felling. I'm thankful and grateful. It is what it is. Always live for me and enjoy life. Give Monkey a hug for me. No, I am not scared. It's cold shit in here, but I'm at peace. I'm ready to be at home. Let's ride, Warden." As the drug flowed, he told her, "Let me go to sleep," and mouthed "love" twice, while gasping and trembling briefly before going still. He was pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m., 24 minutes later. The inclusion of their service dog in this final farewell added an unprecedented element to the usual grim proceedings of an execution. Dubois believed in Nelson's redemption, viewing him as transformed despite his past, and was disappointed by the church's support for the execution, calling it contrary to forgiveness. On social media platform X, posts focused on his defiant words, "Let's ride, Warden," and the dog's role, garnering significant engagement, e.g. one post with 359k views, often framing it as chilling or symbolic of support. The image of a young woman holding up a dog so her condemned husband could see it one last time created one of the most emotionally complex execution scenes in recent memory. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.